Roxy, tell me what your biggest roommate pet peeve is.
Anything that sort of just like gets left around the apartment kind of drives me nuts. It's okay if there are half opened cans of seltzer everywhere, but
why am I sensing that perhaps that is something that you do?
That might be a thing that a person could point to as annoying about me. What do you think drives roommates the most mad about you?
Well, based on experience, my desire for quiet in the apartment, especially since I work from home, might strike some people as like unreasonable. I would ask you, what would it take for you to get a roommate again? But that's happening.
True.
Marriage is typically one way to acquire a roommate.
For better or worse.
In sickness and in health. From Religion News Service, this is Saved by the City, a podcast from two Christian women living uncomfortably close to 23 million people in New York. I'm Katelyn Beatty.
And I'm Roxy Stone. Katelyn, I have my Bible open here in front of me.
Wow. This is so holy of you. I didn't think this day would come.
Okay. All right. I'm going to read a passage from Acts, a description of the early church that I'm sure we're all very familiar with. It goes a little something like this. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. What comes to mind when you hear those verses?
Honestly, what comes to mind is a kind of contemporary Christian leader or community who's trying to challenge like the individualism of the contemporary church, to kind of goad more Christians to think about money and possessions in a different way. I don't think I've ever encountered an actual Christian community who's like trying to do what is described in Acts, but like in theory, lots of Christian leaders in the contemporary left of center evangelical world have like tried to point us to this verse and what it's describing. What about you?
Yeah, I think same, although I would also say it was like the motto, I think, of our college church. This is easier to do when you're in college and everybody's already living together as roommates, you know?
And you don't have any possessions.
But there was this sense that like we're really gonna do this. We're gonna do this in a way that Christians have never done it before. We live together, we do life together. That was a big phrase.
I've heard of this.
Then.
Yes.
It also came with all kinds of other ideas at the time, like, you know, also you had to be accountability partners and do kind of mission stuff together on the college campus. But you really ordered your life, right, around this like community of believers, to a point even where there was sometimes like, oh, you're not hanging out with us tonight. You're hanging out with your poetry class.
Secular friends.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the voice they had, but in my head, that's what it was.
Typical Colorado accent right there.
Maybe Western Colorado? I don't know. At the time, were you like, yes, this is a really beautiful vision. This is what I want.
Yeah, I felt really sold out for it. And then really bummed when it sort of all kind of dissipated, you know, when all of us like graduated from college and went on to live very normal American lives. Like even the most like zealous and sold out of the crew, like got married and had kids and lived in like a nuclear family, single family home, you know?
Right. This vision that Luke is putting forth in Acts was countercultural then and is countercultural now. And like the thing about being countercultural is it takes active resistance and like making choices that are quite different from your peers to enact the thing that is radically different. And also there is this alternative Christian narrative that prioritizes or centers the nuclear family as like the most important thing you can
ironically
be a part of, maybe apart from like local church attendance. So it was radical then, it's radical now, and it just feels easier to not.
Yeah.
If I found two casual roommates,
Mm-hmm.
complicated enough for me
Right.
to move out during the pandemic. And we didn't have any kind of like prayer time together. We certainly didn't share. Well, we shared some possessions in common, like a hot pot, but like too high of an ask
Right.
that I moved out on my own and I'm paying significantly more to live on my own. Like, how
Mm-hmm.
much more is the ask of you're sharing a roof with maybe 12 or 15 people who are all up in each other's business and you are sharing it. It's like almost inconceivable.
It's inconceivable, and it's countercultural now to the point where you're like, that's weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of resistance and cultural sort of like stigmas put around that. Like either you get accused of being like in a cult, living in some kind of weird commune, or like maybe there's something sexually weird going on there. Like, are these swingers?
Sometimes there are.
And sometimes there are. Per a recent New York Times article.
Oh, yeah, the polycule.
Or was it New York Magazine?
No, it was the New York Times Magazine. Everybody go take a break, type in New York Times Magazine article polycule. Anyway, yes, the idea of living together and sharing things in common with other adults as adults is so countercultural that it has this attendant baggage of being weird, deviant, potentially abusive, or like unhealthy. Like, that's unhealthy boundaries.
Right.
Or we all know that what it means to enter into adulthood is to buy your first home, either as an individual or a couple. Why in the world are you choosing to co-own a house with 10 other people?
Yeah. And the idea of living with roommates is like, oh, that's something that you do out of necessity. When you're younger, when you're not married or not partnered, when you want to save money. But you're surely going to grow out of that, right? Like you're going to find your footing. There isn't really a vision for what it might look like to choose to live with roommates or with friends because you want to, not because you need to.
So I know you and John are thinking through these dynamics as you prepare to enter into a new stage of life. So how are you both swimming upstream? Not that any of this is a promise, just for the record. Like,
yes,
this is all in flux. This is an ideal that we're, there are lots of variables. Things could change.
Thank you.
You're not locking yourself into anything.
John and I are genuinely considering living with one of our best friends after we're married. And, I don't know how to put like an odds on that because I still feel like you said, there are like things in flux and variables and whatever. But that's part of the point is like, even with all of us agreeing this is something we want to do, it's still so hard to make it happen. Just in terms of logistics, like timing the move right and when it works for everybody and finding time to look at apartments together with busy schedules, trying to prioritize everybody's non-negotiables and pick a neighborhood that works for everybody. And then that's like not even to mention thinking about like finances or whose couch we keep. I mean, it's like there's a lot of so it could be a real all-out battle there.
I think we talked about this with Andy Crouch 2 years ago.
Yeah,
like the concept of a household as being much more expansive than what we have today.
Right.
Yeah. So the early church, it wasn't like, hey, most people are isolated and lonely, and let's correct that by all living together. It was, we already live with our families, but why don't we create this new family?
Right.
In the vision of this new community where we share everything and hold everything in common.
Right. So America circa 2024 has patterned us to live in a very different way. I find this vision incredibly compelling. And the older I get, the more I see them as sort of offering a solution to all of our like societal woes, or maybe many of them, not all of them, and like our worst inclinations. Obviously, it's more affordable to live with people. It's less lonely. It's less isolating. It's better if you're trying to raise kids to have a support system, or if you have a super anxious dog who needs company a lot. Or like it's better for the environment to share resources, to live in dense neighborhoods with public transportation, like all of these things that this kind of living might actually be good for us and good for society.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I really like living the way that I have been trained to live, which is on my own or with a nuclear family.
I have had roommates for periods of my entire adult life, and I've also had long stretches of living alone. You know, in the Chicago suburbs, when your rent for a one-bedroom apartment is $675 a month,
Oh,
it's like, why wouldn't I live alone? This is amazing. The primary reason I moved out during the pandemic was that I felt tired of negotiating everything.
Yeah.
Some of it was probably heightened by the pandemic, like the fact that we were all mostly at home, whereas prior to that, we were all out at jobs or like traveling. I just love doing things how I want to do them in my apartment. I think I probably just, my wiring, I probably have a higher need for some form of solitude than a lot of people, like time to just sit quietly in the morning, to the point where if I were to get married someday, I know that alone would be an adjustment. Sharing a bed with somebody, even that would be an adjustment.
Yeah. You could get a king. I mean, maybe not in New York.
Yes. I want to be able to roll. Like, I want an entire rotation and still not hit the other person. That's the goal. But have I just bought into this false American narrative of individualism and like the highest value is like personal preference over community? On paper, I would say that's not right. That's not how we are meant to live. But then I just feel so much internal resistance to the idea of like sharing a space with a lot of people.
Same.
So are we sinning by living alone?
Okay, let's put a pin in that.
In this whole self-flagellation. It's probably a good idea.
Maybe in order to discern this, I think an old-fashioned pros and cons list is in order.
So, what are 5 pros and 5 cons? I feel like we've touched on the cons, but maybe we start with cons first. What are some cons to living this way? Let's take 5 minutes.
We're back. I don't know if we each got 5, but I feel like we probably would have overlap anyway.
First off, I feel that the potential for conflict,
which starts with con,
right, fittingly, is quite high.
It is inevitable. You will have a lot of conflict.
So if you're conflict avoidant, this is going to be hard.
I think probably both of us would feel this, like not having enough alone time or solitary time is a con for me.
I feel that this is like a crucial thing I need in order to be an okay human. It's not just like, I just love a break, but like I really need downtime, quiet time to process, think, just feel balanced in the world. So it seems like you would have to give up some element of solitary time.
Or just be like so intentional about finding it, which might upset people, which would lead to conflict and would lead to more need for communication and boundary drawing. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. All of that.
I think we've talked about this before. I feel very attached to my space and how it's set up and how it's decorated and how it's organized. And I think feeling like I have to share that and other people have a say and I may not like their say. That feels hard for me.
Yes.
Okay, my last one is that a con for me is like feeling judged or just feeling watched all the time. Like maybe they're like judging how I'm making an egg or maybe judging like that I'm still in my pajamas at noon on a Saturday or something.
Well, on that front, you're not going to get any judgment from me. But on the opposite end, for me, like
like you're going to judge your roommates a lot. Surprise. Katelyn has opinions.
Yeah, that's the problem. I think things should be done in a certain way. But okay. This is maybe perhaps a great transition to our list of pros.
Oh, good.
And the first one that comes to mind is that perhaps living with other people will be good formationally. Personal growth, just like
Mhm.
being sanctified, to use a super religious term. So that's one.
I love that your pro is like the result of all of those cons might help me become a more patient and better person.
I don't know. Again, on paper, yes.
I think I feed off people's energy or feed off people's like hobbies or motivations or, so if I'm like living with people who are really active and go out and go for runs and go for hikes and love to be outdoors and like, then I will do all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy joining people in things that they love, and that can like rub off on me, which is fun. So exposure and
Yeah.
motivation and that kind of thing.
Or kind of just like your world is going to be expanded.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Practically, the financial realities are not to be downplayed.
Not at all. I mean, it's a big, big deal.
Even just sharing like mayonnaise.
Definitely.
Like everything that is here in my apartment, I paid for.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that feels a little wasteful.
Definitely. I mean, living single is like the most expensive way to live. And there are things that you will obviously like. If you buy toilet paper, you will use all of it. And you will use all of it slower than if 3 people were using the toilet paper and you're all sharing. So it's like there are some things that are like just a cost. There'll always be a cost, right?
You know what this reminds me of? The more economic thing is to get a bidet.
A bidet. We should all have bidets. The bidet life.
Great hashtag.
But there are other things that you truly just split, rent, or the internet.
Yes.
And then there are things like groceries where they package them for bigger families and it goes bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think another potential pro is that if things go well in this community, this is extended social support, either in raising kids or when someone is sick or has long-term disability or injury or is just entering a stage of life where they have to rely on more people. I mean, we don't need to rehash the fear that many people have about
dying alone
in their apartments with their cat eating their face.
This is the biggest one to me because I think that a lot of us who live alone or have lived alone, especially as we get older, like there's real sort of fear and anxiety around like, what does it mean to not have a traditional support system around me as I face who knows what,
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't even have to be aging. It could be like, well, what if I get laid off from my job? When I run out of mayonnaise, somebody else could pick it up at the store. It doesn't always have to be me doing everything. I mean, I think there's just all of these ways where it's just easier to live with help. There's a lot of idea in America, I think, that you just buy the help. You pay for childcare, you pay for grocery delivery, you pay for the Uber to take you to the hospital,
right,
for your surgery. Like, there's all these ways where it's like, oh, well, you can just pay for it.
I just remembered during a college semester where I was studying abroad, I lived in a big house with like 25 other people who were all in the program, and we were split into different groups. And then every night of the week, we all took turns cooking dinner for each other. So you only had one night of the week where you were responsible for cooking dinner for the group, and you'd go out and get your groceries that day. But then every other night of the week, you could count on having a freshly prepared dinner waiting for you. That's a great plan.
Right.
It worked so well for us. It was relatively inexpensive. It was also like at the end of the day, you'd have this like friend meal. And that sounds kind of amazing.
It does. And maybe that's like my last pro. Even though I want a lot of alone time, I also do love people and connection. And it is nice to know that there's something like that built in. Like I could take my meal to my room if I wanted to, if I'm having that kind of day. But also, I could sit and eat it with other people. And that's really nice. Those unexpected moments that you can get with people when you live together.
Maybe another way of thinking about it is like spontaneous fun.
Oh,
because like spontaneous fun doesn't happen a lot in my life these days. It's planned fun.
Right. And if you were just like, oh, you're not doing anything for the next few hours, I'm not either. Let's go for a walk. Let's, let's watch this TV show or whatever.
Again, to move very pragmatically, I think for the people who need solitary time, the household or the community has like a word or a set, like quiet hours or something, like 2 nights a week.
Yeah.
Everybody can go quietly to their rooms and read. And like we all agree, I don't know. I feel like there could be a way to like just
house rules.
structure it so it feels less personal.
I love this. I love our pros and cons list. I still think probably the ideal is like the friends situation. You know, we all live in the same building. We share some resources, but not all of them. We each have our own bathrooms and maybe our own kitchens. I don't know.
It should be said, most people have not even remotely achieved the friends ideal.
No, it's hard to come by.
But our guest today found out that there are some people out there who are living in ways that prioritize friendship or companionship outside the structure of the nuclear family.
Rhaina Cohen is a journalist and author of the new and fascinating book, The Other Significant Others: Reimagining Life with Friendship at the Center.
I'm interested in having legitimate options that move beyond marriage. And I think also for us to recalibrate our expectations of marriage, where your partner is supposed to be your everything, as the Michael Bublé song goes.
We were excited to talk about her findings and why this kind of friendship might be the future.
But first, a shout out from the organization that makes this all possible.
Religion News Service is an independent, award-winning source of global reporting on religion, spirituality, culture, and ethics.
From communes to confirmations to compost burials, RNS covers religious communities and their traditions, from birth to death and everything in between.
And be sure to check out Religion News Service's other podcast offerings. We've got Martini Judaism with Rabbi Jeffrey Salkin, The State of Belief with Reverend Paul Brandeis Rauschenbusch, and Amber Hacker and Tom Levinson present the newest edition, Money Meets Meaning, exploring the intersection of faith and finance. Give them a listen.
This is the last episode of season 7. It's hard to believe, of SBTC. So we'd love to hear your ideas for next season, whether topics or guest ideas. Shoot us an email at sbtcpodcast@religionnews.com or drop a rating or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Today, we're joined by Rhaina Cohen. Rhaina is the author of The Other Significant Others and a producer and editor with NPR's Embedded.
Hi, Rhaina.
Rhaina, thank you so much for joining me and Roxy for this conversation. We've seen so much buzz in recent months about your book, The Other Significant Others. It's clearly connecting with people and meeting a felt need. Why do you think friendship is such a buzzy topic in this cultural moment?
I think for a lot of people, friendship is where they get a lot of their sustenance, but don't have that acknowledged by the outside world. That friendship is sort of a nice part of life, but we don't talk about our friends as if they are as significant as they actually are. And they are probably growing in significance for a lot of people because, you know, kind of along the lines of things that you've talked about before, so many people now are not getting married later. They might split from their partner. They might survive their spouse. And that means that there might be decades of life or an entire life where people are orienting not around a romantic partner, but don't also want to be in total solitude. And their friends might be the center of their world. So I think that the stories in the book have given people something to look toward as validation of the way that maybe they're already living or want to live, but nobody has really given them a roadmap or legitimacy for what that can be.
One of the things that I noticed in your book and other conversations I've heard you have is this sense of like, there is no roadmap. There is no legitimacy. Anybody who's trying to center friendships in a way beyond like, let's get brunch on Sunday, like run into a lot of barriers that are systemic in a way. So when you think about some of those barriers and the stories that you told in the book, what are some of those that come to mind immediately? The barriers that are like, that just make trying to live this kind of life, we've set it up to be difficult.
There are practical barriers for people who want to center their lives around their friends. There are barriers that affect the relationship, like interpersonal ones. And then there are, I think, emotional barriers. So, you know, to give examples of each of those, on a practical level, I was talking to people yesterday who are very close friends, and the two of them and their spouses are buying a home together. And it's apparently been a mess to try, at every turn they've had people telling them you shouldn't do this. And also the whole kind of, real estate and legal system are not built for people to organize their lives around their friends. They're for marriages. So people run into situations like that. I've looked at a number of stories where people have either not been able to get into the hospital to take care of their friend or lied to hospital staff because they feared that they wouldn't be allowed to make decisions as a friend and said they were the wife or the sister. And, interpersonally, if you end up having conflict within a friendship, there is no couples therapist to go to who specializes in friendship. I've talked to friends who have gone to couples therapy and have used the resources that are designed for romantic relationships because that's the best that they can get. But we don't have the social infrastructure to support friendships when things are difficult. And then on the emotional level, it's really invalidating to have people not just not support the friendship, but often question your behavior. So the story that I, opened the book with is about these two men who are now in their 30s. And the mother of one of them kept asking, is it a romantic relationship? If it is, I would support you. And she just sort of couldn't wrap her head around the idea that the men were friends. And I think she was extremely well-meaning, and her, thinking has changed over time. But it captures the kind of scrutiny that a lot of these people face, and they are made to feel as if they are juvenile and they are incomplete and that they are not prioritizing the correct things if they make a friendship or multiple friendships the relationship that they want to invest in more than any other.
That's a really helpful framework, just the various barriers. And in all of those examples, from home ownership to counseling to just the attitudes of people around us, I'm really tempted to say, oh my gosh, we have made too much of marriage. Like, all of those examples highlight how much we have placed on the institution of marriage to be the defining, sustaining relationship of anyone's life. And then we've built kind of social and legal systems around that. So do we need to take down the institution of marriage?
I am not telling the world that we need to get rid of marriage. I am by nature a pluralist. I don't think that the answer is to strip away an institution that means a lot to a lot of people. I just think that the current situation where there's a yes or no option, either you get married or you don't, and then you have nothing else that can provide a lot of the same goods or that will be recognized socially or legally, that is not giving people free choice in their life, and it's just not realistic. Even if everybody wanted to get married, which is not true for everyone, not everyone can. And, not everyone finds the right partner, or they outlive their spouse, or things change in the relationship. So I'm interested in having legitimate options that move beyond marriage. And I think also for us to recalibrate our expectations of marriage, which have changed in a really short period of time, to go from a relationship that was extremely pragmatic to one that became about love, to now really being the crux of your life, where your partner is supposed to be your everything. As the Michael Bublé song goes, your spouse is supposed to be your best friend and is supposed to be your co-parent and your confidant, and just sort of everything wrapped into one. So I think it would be the expectations that I would change, rather than say nobody should be going to the altar anymore. It feels just as delegitimizing in a way as people saying that friendship isn't a kind of relationship that has value. I'm not going to say that about marriage.
Yes. And to be clear, I was being...
You're being facetious.
You ask the tough questions, Katelyn.
Roxy and I both grew up in faith communities that really added a kind of spiritual layer to the primacy of marriage. And as someone who is unmarried and has spent, my entire adult life really invested in deep friendships that I have found sustaining, there is this sense of just wanting to have a panoply of different kinds of love recognized and acknowledged, rather than a kind of hierarchy. And I think if I understand correctly, you and your husband are also kind of living this out in your own lives, because you share a home with another couple. So
yeah,
would you talk a little bit about how you're a pluralist both in principle and in practice? What does that look like, and how does that play out?
So I live with my husband and two friends and their two young children. When we moved in, there was one child, and now there's two. And on the like pluralism front, one thing I'll say is that my friends are religiously observant. They're Jewish in a way that is far more observant than anything that I grew up with. And for them, the meaning of marriage is very different from what the meaning of marriage is for my husband and me, which we knew immediately because one of these friends officiated our wedding. So I'm exposed to people who have a somewhat different idea of what a good life entails in a lot of ways. And I have a number of friends who are more religiously traditional. And that's part of what I keep front of mind when I think about there are multiple ways to live a good life. I just want people on all sides to kind of see that there are multiple ways to do things. And maybe the reason I reacted very seriously to your facetious question is that I think a mistake that I see in a lot of different spaces for people who maybe are proposing things I agree with is that they'll see one prescription and say, this is the way everybody's told you have to do X thing, and then say that's wrong and it has to be Y.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of using the same logic. But my husband and I and my friends have been living in this setup for several years, and you just really get to know people in an intimate way when you are up in each other's space all the time, and when your families are, having dinners at your house or staying for days or more at a time. I mean, we just see each other in all states.
I think part of the reason your book, I think, is getting a lot of attention and that this conversation has been resonating with people is that I think a lot of us know something in the way we've set up society isn't working. And maybe we realized it in the pandemic. Maybe we realized it because everybody's burning out, because we have a Surgeon General who's literally calling loneliness an epidemic. When you kind of trace back, how did we get here? How did we get to a point where we're lonely, where we're burned out, where we're isolated? What do you point to? Are we trying to reclaim something that we have had in past societies, or are you kind of thinking we need to do something new?
I think of this as sort of remixing tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that's come up with other people I've talked to as well. So it's not, totally original idea. And I can give one example of it where somebody I interviewed who now lives with his wife and several kids next door to two other couples who he's extremely close to. He had been daydreaming about living in a neighborhood with all of his friends where the kids can run in and out of each other's houses.
Mm-hmm.
And his friend observed to him oh, that's just a traditional Jewish community, because the people in the conversation
Right.
were Jewish. It's the shtetl or whatever. I was exchanging messages with an old professor who was saying that he had, I think, grew up in a house with 11 people in a bungalow in Chicago on a street where his aunts and uncles. And so I think what I'm interested in trying to restore in some way is an emphasis on life beyond the nuclear family, that has been an experiment that has led to a lot of isolation for people and a lot of overwhelm if they are caregivers and disconnection. And in the past, the way that you would not have that kind of isolation, like this professor told me, he can't remember ever feeling lonely as a kid. That was not a problem. Maybe having people too much up in his his life was the issue, but it's certainly not loneliness. It was extended family, and opening that up to platonic relationships, to relationships that aren't about necessarily family and spouses, is a way to get some of the goods from the past, like connection, but not make it bound to only certain kinds of relationships that may or may not work for people. Even when people talk about extended family, especially when I talk to immigrants, they, have people that they understood to be aunts, uncles, and cousins who were not actually blood ties,
Right.
that those were friends. So this thing might seem radical to really center a friendship, but people have done it in different ways over time, but they've often used the language of family as a way to denote how important the person is to them. So it can be even hard to see that actually the extended family incorporated a lot of friends in many cases.
Feels like a good setup for a point that you've made, which is a lot of people run into almost language barriers when they try to describe these kinds of relationships. Like BFF sounds like your little kids with bracelets, and so many other words seem like they have romantic connotations, or friend just seems like it diminishes what it really is. What language do you find most helpful? And I think it's an important question, because I think one of the barriers you talked about is people not understanding what you're trying to do and not really having a category for what we're trying to talk about here.
I think the language question is really maybe harder than I expected. I was interested in the beginning of assigning a label to these sorts of friendships, and then over time kind of changing even what the friendship type was that I was looking for. And I use the term platonic partners in the book. It's been interesting how just in the last few years, the term platonic life partner or platonic partner is like more in the vernacular than it was. I get Google alerts for those terms, and I've just seen them crop up. And I think partly TikTok has been an influence. And I was reading a piece in The Atlantic a few weeks ago, and it just was describing, I think, a Jodie Foster film and used the term platonic partner without any explanation, which, felt like an imperfect term to me because it's like a little bit clunky, but there are ways that language, we get acclimated to it, and then it makes sense, and it no longer feels quite the same way as when you're introducing it. So it seems very possible that is a kind of term that can stick. The thing that I'm most interested in with the book is less about labels and more about asking questions. If someone is, it would be nice to move to a world where people could say the word partner and you could ask about the nature of the relationship, not asking if it was sexual, but how are you partners to each other? In what ways are you involved in each other's lives? Or knowing that there's a drop-down menu in your mind of what does it mean to be a partner? Can it be, is it platonic or romantic, or is it a sibling or a cousin who acts as a partner to you? I certainly came across stories of, sisters who lived next door to each other for 50 years and that sort of thing. I absolutely understand the need for language, and I would like us to be able to have language beyond best friend or BFF. But I also would be most excited if people could come with more curiosity to relationships that are not in the clear marital or familial categories.
What is a partner in life? What is the essence of that kind of relationship that you're trying to describe?
Maybe one way to describe this is to tell you a little bit about the evolution and what I thought I was reporting on.
Yeah.
I initially thought I was reporting on modern day romantic friendships. So romantic friendship is a kind of really affectionate relationship that you would see between same-sex pairs of friends in the 17th through turn of the 20th centuries. And partly that was because that was that sort of a fusion really resonated with my experience with the friend who made me want to write the book in the first place. And then I started talking to people, and they would be like, well, I know somebody who has a friendship like this, but it's more like a sibling relationship. It doesn't have those kinds of elements that feel sweet or romantic. And I brushed it away as that's different. But then over time, I realized what actually I was interested in were friendships where there was a lot of commitment involved, where people were building their lives around each other, where they were looking toward a future that they would share together. And that seemed to me to be the essence of what partnership was, what I thought we valued as a society so much in romantic relationships, even if we have not been kind of forced to unpack what is it that justifies the special status of romantic relationships. I think a lot of it is the expectation that you're going to build your life around each other. So that's why including the word partner certainly feels like it describes these sorts of friendships, and would be nice if people understood that there could be different types of partners, and one type of partner can be a platonic partner.
This phrase is imperfect, but the phrase that comes to mind is ride or die. But I feel like doesn't get at the seriousness or that earnestness of what's at stake.
That's also up to people. And I've heard every term in the book, including ride or die, because people don't have language and then they have to create their own. And ride or die is one that at least it has some recognition, maybe not in the hospital, but socially in some circles, people would get what that means.
It's playful. I understand that. But there's an implication with ride or die that this is a commitment.
Until death.
Until death. Yes. But I am curious, in the stories that you told, what are some of the ways that you saw people make a commitment? You're not taking vows in front of a judge or a priest or a rabbi. What are ways that people sort of immemorialized that commitment?
I do write about a few people who got married because they wanted either legal rights or some kind of social recognition, and used the one institution that was available to them, and doesn't always work out so well, or didn't in their cases, but that is actually something that people have done. There are kind of legal processes that are not that sexy, but do indicate a kind of commitment, like exchanging medical power of attorney rights, legal power of attorney rights. So basically being able to make decisions for someone if they are incapacitated, that sort of thing. One person I write about made her friend the executor of her estate and gave her different responsibilities in her will. And they had a lot of discussions about what the friend would be to her at that point. Younger people have talked about having a friend wedding in a social way to commit to each other. Several people I write about have bought houses together or lived together while renting, or bought houses right next door to each other. Some are godparents to the other's children. One pair of friends that I write about, they are legal co-parents because one woman decided to have a child on her own, and then the friend ended up functioning as a parent and getting legal rights. So there are, a whole bunch of practical or legal ways that people have enshrined their commitment.
It has been a bit disheartening to see the modern evangelical church so prioritize the nuclear family to the detriment of friendship, when there are so many examples throughout church history and in the Bible of these kind of intense, committed, even like covenanted friendships, that the church has traditionally had much more room for friendship. Are there specific things that faith communities today could do to kind of reclaim friendship as a more central relationship?
I think if marriage is presented as the be all and all, that's certainly not going to serve a lot of people. One is maybe like elevating the stories that do exist in religious texts, like David and Jonathan in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. One of the places where I learned a little bit about the history of friendship within Christian thought was from a very particular, more conservative Christian community of people who are gay and voluntarily celibate, and have looked a lot at the history of friendship within, Christian history. There are different friendship traditions that go back in different religious denominations. Like in the Syrian Orthodox Church, there was this longstanding practice of what is called sworn brotherhood, where men would enter into a church together and have a priest say some blessings over the Gospels and bind these two men together for life as brothers. And I spoke to a couple of women who found themselves, in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and the Archbishop did this ceremony for them in the 1980s.
Oh, wow.
And it completely transformed their friendship. They are, 40 years later, they still use the term beloved sister and sort of see themselves as being connected. And I would be really interested in, are there rituals that maybe could be dusted off, or in denominations that are more willing to adapt, like in, Reform or Reconstructionist Judaism, for instance, are there rituals that could be made for friendship to honor them so that they're not kind of seen as peripheral? And because I think rituals really matter, and that is an aspect of life that religion does really well.
I am getting married in a couple months, and we are seriously considering living with one of our closest friends. And so I am kind of asking a personal question, which is what do you recommend about that? How has it been good for your marriage to live with other people?
You get to see different sides of your partner. I mean, I could say very specifically in my case, my husband loves children, and having children around, there's a very special giggle that he only makes around children and small animals. So I get to see that delight from him. And I think, in my experience, being very influenced by the people I'm around, not just in their temperament, but what are they thinking about? What are they working on? And there are ways that I think for both you and a partner that you end up having more influences. In my husband's case, he's learned a lot about Judaism because he wants to participate in, rituals and stuff in the household and wants to understand them. And I've seen this really curious side of him that I know exists, but I'm seeing it in a new way. Basically, I'm kind of getting at different ways that I get to appreciate dimensions of him that might not have otherwise surfaced if it was just the two of us and I could get baked into our ways of life. It's nice to have different people you can go to. When I've had good news and, let's say I'm working from home and my housemates are home and my husband's at the office during the day, I have somebody that I can go to. I think it really helps guard against, especially if you're living with a partner, just making them the default for everything, and knowing that there are other people around and that there are also other ways to live. It puts things in perspective for me when I'm spending time with close friends and also my husband, because I can feel like my way of doing things makes sense, and then realize actually there are people who, do things quite differently. So I think if you find the right people, it's great. I think you had asked about how you do this. I think having really upfront conversations from the start are very helpful. One thing that we did that is helpful if people are kind of like want to be very sunny about everything is that we did a pre-mortem. So the question was like, let's assume that this household dissolves in a year because we decided it didn't work. If that happened, why? So you're forced to reckon with what could go wrong. And I found that it made me feel closer to my friends, for all of us to utter what our fears were. There's something that was vulnerable about that, and it helped us guard against some of our fears happening because we actually knew what they were.
That was actually really helpful.
I hope it works out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
This is fascinating.
Thanks for the questions.
Well, Katelyn, that's a wrap on another amazing season of Saved by the City. Just in time, too, since you're heading out to explore the Great West, my part of the country. You've got a road trip planned through several national parks.
Yes, I leave early tomorrow morning and start in Sequoia National Park in Central California. And then I basically drive all the way across Nevada through Las Vegas to Zion National Park.
My favorite
and I'll be there for
national
several
park.
days. And then I will go to the Grand Canyon for several days. I've never been to any of these parks.
I'm so excited for you.
Well, I may be wrong, but I may not have to ask what you're most excited about this summer break.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely most excited about the wedding and to get married, but I'm not going to lie. I'm also really excited to get away and to go on a real vacation, also known as a honeymoon.
How bourgeois of you. Why aren't you bringing friends on your honeymoon?
That's a good question. Good question. We're not, though. And no, we don't know when we're going on our honeymoon yet. And no, we don't know where we're going on our honeymoon yet.
I thought you were going to Schiaparelli?
Sardinia.
Close enough.
I don't even...
Okay. Well, I've already established I would like you and John to be in town for a certain milestone birthday.
Yes.
I realize this is one of many things you have to consider.
We are planning
and
everything around.
We will celebrate later if you can't make it. But also around that time, I will be doing a solo hosted Saved by the City limited series called Tell Me What to Do with My Life.
Ooh.
And the idea is like just people I really think are cool and I respect. I'm going to have them on and ask them like, tell me how to live better. Tell me how to hack the life code.
I'm excited about this.
Well, I'm excited to celebrate you and John in 6 weeks, less than 6 weeks.
We hope all of you have a wonderful summer. Catch Katelyn and her solo summer series in late summer, and we'll see you all back here next fall.
Bye.
Saved by the City is a religion news service production. Senior producer is Jay Woodward, and the consulting editor is Paul O'Donnell. Our editor is Julia Wyndham.
Chaz Rousseau put together our look, and Martin Fowler wrote our theme music.
We are Roxy Stone.
And Caitlin Beatty.
Thanks for listening.